In January 2006, Paul Martin was no longer Prime Minister, and a younger and more enthusiastic Stephen Harper had taken over the helm of the Canadian government. The Liberal Party, as per charter, is required to find a leadership replacement within months of the old leader resigning. The Liberal leadership race brought out a lot of high-profile candidates. In the previous election, Paul Martin had recruited former NDP Ontario Premier Bob Rae to the party in hopes of bolstering his support in Ontario. Now, Bob Rae was seeking party leadership. Michael Ignatieff was a Canadian professor who focused on Canadian political science at Harvard University. He had returned to Canada entirely to become leader of the party. If you've ever taken a political science or a Canadian history course, it's almost certain you have read some of Ignatieff's work. Finally, of the major contenders was Stéphane Dion. Dion was a dual citizen with France and Canada. His wife, from France, didn't speak a word of English. Dion, for his part, struggled with the language. People who worked closely with him indicated his English was very good, and honestly did not understand why on the campaign trail his English deteriorated the way it did. At the conference, there were 8 people running for leadership. How this all works is all the candidates will appear on the ballot. If a majority consensus is reached, that person wins. If no majority is reached, the bottom person is dropped off the ballot and another ballot is circulated. In most leadership contests in the Liberal Party, it's usually only one person who wins, and that's the end of it. But this one was a lot longer process. People also had the choice of dropping out in between ballots. On the first ballot, 2 people dropped out. One of those was famous floor crosser Scott Brisson, who was under investigation for insider trading. The first ballot showed Ignatieff was in the lead, followed by Rae, and then Dion. The second ballot saw 3 people drop off. Ignatieff was still in the lead, but Rae and Dion were catching up. On the third ballot, something major happened. Gerard Kennedy, who was a strong contender, dropped out, giving all his delegates to Dion. This catapulted Dion to the top of the ballot, ahead of both Rae and Ignatieff. On the final ballot, it was between Dion and Ignatieff. Dion had won by a mere 5%, the smallest margin of any Liberal leadership contest. This was seen by many to be the leadership race for who would be the next Prime Minister of Canada. Up to this point in Canadian history, there had only ever been one Liberal leader who had not been Prime Minister of Canada. But that would change fast. Dion was not short on qualifications. He was a party loyalist to the core. Under Chrétien, he was an intergovernmental minister. This was a seemingly unimportant position, but in the 90s, Quebec separatism was on the rise, and suddenly the position became the most important in the Chrétien government. Dion would become the Minister of Environment under Martin. This is also a seemingly unimportant position in Canadian politics, but in 2004, Canada would join the Kyoto Accord and would have to craft policies to set environmental regulations and standards with the provinces. Now he's in the most important job. So a guy who took useless jobs and turned them into the most important job was now in the position of the most important job in the country, and would utterly turn it into the most useless one. The Parliament would last a little over 2 years. At the beginning of the Parliament, a scandal called the In and Out scandal broke. The scandal involved the Conservative government abusing donation and spending caps. The Conservatives were collecting and fundraising more money than they could possibly spend, so they began sending money off to their ridings that would not reach their personal spending cap. They would donate the money back to Conservatives and any money they had not spent. This allowed the Conservatives to essentially recycle their money. The Conservatives were never found guilty of any wrongdoing, but the accusations continued. Dion was demanding an independent investigation into the matter, similar to the Gomery inquiry, which was still going on. However, all the threats were bouncing off as the Gomery inquiry continued to bring out more and more damning information. You had a corrupt politician accusing another corrupt politician of being corrupt. Harper played his hand by putting forward the Federal Accountability Act that would tighten up insider trading, election financing rules, and new party financing rules. In terms of politics, this was a one-up. While people were accusing him of corruption, he held a piece of paper that said that if you don't sign it, you are corrupt. And everyone voted in favor of it. Next up was passing a budget. Their budget would implement their main campaign promise, a childcare tax credit. At the time, it defunded the Kelowna Accord and Kyoto Accord. The Colonial Accord was a new funding stream for Aboriginals negotiated by Paul Martin. The Kyoto Accord was an environmental treaty negotiated by Dion himself. In order to pass the bills, Harper needed the support of either the Liberals or the Bloc. The Bloc supported the bill. Some Liberals would break with their party and vote with the Conservatives on extending the combat mission in Afghanistan. They were able to pass a number of measures with mixed party support, including fixed election dates, HST reductions, and destruction of the gun registry. A year later, the Bloc would pass the budget with the Conservatives. The 2007 budget would see the return of Danny Williams. Harper had promised Premier Williams that he would share royalties with Newfoundland and Nova Scotia on offshore oil production off the coast of these provinces. However, Harper broke his campaign promise, and now Danny Williams was calling for all Atlantic Canadians to unite and for all Atlantic Canadian MPs to vote against the budget. Only Conservative MP Bill Casey broke rank with the Conservatives and voted against the bill. He was ejected from the Conservative Party, and years later he would reappear as a Liberal. This was the foundation of the anything but Conservative movement. It was originally bankrolled by Danny Williams, who was independently wealthy, but spread virally. When the actual election came, Williams focused on his home province of Newfoundland, asking them to elect not one Conservative. Years later, Liberal Seamus O'Regan would call this move bad for the province, as it shut the province out of government funding and funding talks. The 2008 budget would see the creation of a tax-free savings account. If anything is said about Harper, this will be his legacy. This simple and easy savings account gave an emphasis on savings and investment for retirement that Canadians very much craved. But something was brewing. The opposition parties tried to grill the Conservatives on the in-and-out scandal. The Conservatives didn't care to participate, and speakers who came to testify were unreliable. The opposition was actively trying to show the world that the Conservatives would not work with anyone by putting forth bills that the opposition agreed upon, but the Conservatives did not. In the last months of the 39th Parliament, there were public meetings between Stéphane Dion, NDP leader Jack Layton, and Bloc leader Gilles Duceppe. They had made a pact to dissolve the government and get the Governor-General to appoint them as a coalition government. You may remember that Harper made a similar plan in the last election. But Harper did this in secret. Dion was doing this out in the open.
We brought in a non-confidence motion. I said there would be no opposition coalition. We did not bring in a non-confidence motion to overturn the government. We brought in a non-confidence motion to force an election. That's what we did. That's how we became the government. We won an election with the most number of seats. That's my position then, my position now, and I think that's what Canadians expect.
Harper accused Dion of being in allegiance with Liberals, Socialists, and Separatists.
Mr. Speaker, the highest principle of Canadian democracy is that if you want to be Prime Minister, you get your mandate from the Canadian people, not from Quebec.
On this same day, Harper ended Parliament early to prevent a vote to topple the government. This gave Harper time to plan and prepare. During this time, the alliance was disintegrating, as it seems. The Liberals were rising again in the polls and now viewed it possible for them to win the election without the NDP and Bloc. The Conservatives finalized their plan. They laid down a large number of bills they knew that no party would support, and bill after bill was defeated. The only motion they would actually allow for was a confidence vote. Harper went to the Governor-General and used this unusual behavior as a sign that Parliament could not work, and asked for an election to be called. Understand that at the same time Parliament had enacted a minimum of 4-year term of service. Now he was using the Constitution's minimum service as a standing for calling an election. Many to this day still believe this election was invalid because the Governor-General should not have dissolved Parliament. However, Governor-General Michel Jean had called an election, and so the game was on. Stephane Dion had a campaign prepared well before this election. Dion had planned to market the Liberal Party as the greenest of the parties in government. He called it the Green Shift. Suffice to say, it was very complicated, and taking a full 1-hour session to break down his plan. He would go across the country speaking mostly, spending an hour at every stop talking about the Green Shift.
It is as powerful as it is simple. What we want less of: pollution, energy efficiency. The first 3 marginal rates of personal income tax. a 1.5-point reduction to the rate for the lowest tax from 15% to 13.5%.
The basis of the plan was to have a green-focused economy and earn revenue through a carbon taxing plan. He would join the European carbon trading system and promised to earn Canada money by being a good environmental partner. The European carbon system, however, was under deep scrutiny as most partners were unable to reach their goals and were simply too poor to be able to afford to pay for actual carbon credits. Dion could not make this plan work without an endorsement from Elizabeth May of the Green Party. Dion made a secret deal in which May would endorse Dion's leadership. In exchange, Dion would not run a candidate in May's riding. If Dion was anything, it was way too intellectual for his own good. He could not explain his plan to a common person in a convincing manner, and with every campaign stop he made, he lost votes. His campaign team was well aware of what was happening. Even before he created this campaign, they told him it was a vote loser, not a vote winner. But he just ignored all that. He was liberal. He was destined to win. But Harper was up to something. Harper set himself up to create a new persona. In the past, he was really hampered down by this dark and shadowy image of this evil, American-loving person who was trying to destroy Canada. In terms of election strategy, the best thing you can possibly do is give yourself a positive image and your opponent a negative one. But what weakness did Dion have? Being too intelligent is a horrible weakness. No, it was going to be how French he was. Harper would magically transform into Captain Canada. Faster than maple syrup, more powerful than an oil sands laborer, able to drink Tim Hortons coffee in a single gulp. Look in the sky. It's a bird. No, it's a plane. No, it's a plane with Stephen Harper in it. Harper had political endorsements from Wayne Gretzky while playing hockey with children. The attack ads will focus on how Dion couldn't string together sentences, but simply would repeat the statement,
This is unfair. You don't know what to speak about. Do you think it's easy to make priorities?
It became a clash of cultures. Stephane Dion, who is champion of the policies of France, and Stephen Harper, the all-Canadian, who brushes his teeth with maple syrup. A week before the election, CTV ran an interview with Stephane Dion. They decided to also publish the outtakes reel, in which Dion is shown incapable of understanding a very basic question.
I asked him, quote, if you were Prime Minister now, what would you have done that Mr. Harper has not done?
If we'd have been the Prime Minister 2.5 years ago?
If you were the Prime Minister right now, and
right
had
now.
been for the past
Okay,
2
now,
years.
if I'm elected next Tuesday, this Tuesday, it's what you're suggesting.
No, I'm saying if you hypothetically were Prime Minister today,
Today,
what would you have done that Mr. Harper
I would start the
hasn't done?
30-50 plan that we want to start the moment that we'll have a Liberal government. And the 30-50 plan, in fact, the plan for the first 30 days, I should say, the plan for the first 30 days, once you have a Liberal government. Can we start again? Again, I don't understand the question. Because you asked me to be Prime Minister at which moment? Today, or since a week, or 60 weeks, or 60?
No, if you were the Prime Minister during this time already.
We need to start again. I'm sorry. If I was the Prime Minister, starting when? Today? I put the Prime Minister today?
If you were the Prime Minister since Harper's been Prime Minister?
But yes, 2 years and a half ago.
At any given time.
2 years, 2 years and a half ago.
Differently between the time that Harper's been there to change them.
Yeah, but if I have been Prime Minister 2 years and a half ago, we'd have had an agenda. Let's start again.
Come election day, people gave a resounding no vote to Stephane Dion. The Liberals would lose 18 seats, the Conservatives would form a strong minority government, having 46% of the seats, with 40% of the popular vote. Polls indicated that Canadians preferred a minority government, regardless of who was in charge, and winds were changing on support for a more proportionally balanced form of government. No one wanted Stephen Harper to get a majority, but they also didn't want anyone else to have it either. The most important factor in this election is someone we ignored for a while. Jack Layton, a civil rights lawyer. Layton was a bit different from the previous leaders of the NDP party. He was only doing a tour of ridings that his party could actually win. He would not dedicate to a national campaign and was instead targeting people. His message was that, if given a stronger role in a minority government, he would use that to broker for real healthcare reforms and real childcare for children. This word real would be used quite a bit in the next few years because Canadians uniquely believed they were being lied to by politicians.
A real change!
When the totals came in, Jack Layton had picked up a large number of seats. He still represented the weakest party in government, but with the growth from him and Harper, he now had the power to broker for the NDP considerations in the budget. But that's a story for another time.